Number 8. Olga Fernandez. On February 13, 2022, 57-year-old Olga Fernandez got into an argument with a driver over a parking space at her apartment complex. The man apparently rammed his car into the woman on purpose after the verbal altercation got a little out of hand. Olga came out to help after her adult daughter got home and realized someone was in her designated parking spot. The mother went out to confront the person while the 24-year-old girl used the restroom. By the time she came back out, she could hear her mom screaming in pain. Security camera footage from that night at around 3:30 a.m. revealed the moment that 22-year-old Brandon Zambrano ran the woman over. She was waving her arms around wildly and yelling before he drove straight through her and out of the apartment complex. Paramedics did their best to save Olga, but it was already too late. Her injuries were too severe, and she died shortly after. Her children remember their mom as an incredible person with a big heart. They're understandably heartbroken by the loss. Olga's best friend, Ileana Aho, said, "I feel like half of me has been taken away." Police were eventually able to find the suspect after he was arrested for an unrelated charge. They used surveillance footage to track down Brandon's vehicle, which linked him to the hit and run. The man had supposedly been homeless for quite some time, bouncing from place to place. Luckily, he'll have a perfectly cozy bed in prison after he's convicted of second-degree murder. Number 7. Alan Waler. On June 6, 2021, at a home in St. Louis, Missouri, police responded to several calls they received that afternoon about an alleged shooting. When they got to the scene, they saw 29-year-old Alan Waler lying dead in the driveway. The victim's girlfriend refused to be identified, but she told authorities that he was shot after getting into an argument with some men. The suspects were in charge of mowing the grass in Waler's neighbor's yard, and the dispute had apparently been going on for quite a while. In video footage captured by Waler's doorbell, two men walk up to the house as the victim exits his home. He asks the suspects if they were cutting the grass, then they all move out of the camera's range. According to the alleged shooters, Waler then pulled a gun out of nowhere and threatened them. One of the guys said that he cocked the weapon and put it up to one of their heads. Most of the mowers were brothers, and at this point, another man got out of a vehicle with his own firearm and asked Waler why he was threatening them. When Waler moved to raise his weapon again, they shot at him in self-defense. At least that's what they claim happened. If the story went how they say it did, then this might be true. But Waler suffered from 9 bullet wounds. This left his family and many others feeling like something wasn't right. Their version of events did hold up in court though, and none of the brothers had charges pressed against them. Number 6. Elisa Lam. If you're a fan of true crime, then there's no doubt you've heard about the murder of Elisa Lam. Back in 2013, the 21-year-old Canadian woman was visiting the historic Cecil Hotel in Los Angeles, California. The student was on a cross-country trip over the United States, but unfortunately, she never finished her journey. A security camera captured footage of her entering an elevator at the hotel. The doors to the lift didn't close though, and it seemed like she was talking to someone out of her view. Her mannerisms during this interaction seemed extremely sketchy, and she moved in and out of the elevator multiple times. Then suddenly, she vanished into thin air. The clip went viral online when the LA Police Department posted it as part of the investigation. Elisa was reported missing, but just 19 days later, her body was found. Sadly, Elisa was no longer alive, and her remains were discovered stuffed inside a large water tank on top of the Cecil's roof. There are countless theories about what exactly happened to Elisa. Many propose that ghosts had to have been involved in the disappearance. The hotel was first opened back in the 1920s, so it has a rich history. It once served as temporary accommodations for wealthy tourists and businessmen from around the world. But once the Great Depression swept across the states, Cecil's pristine reputation plummeted. The hotel's location was extremely close to Skid Row, and it still is. The area contains many homeless people, sex workers, criminals, and more. In 2013, Cecil Hotel had a few floors designated for guests passing through, while others served as temporary housing for community members of Skid Row. A few people believe that one of these residents, or even a worker at the property, had something to do with the murder. This case has continued to stump both law enforcement and internet investigators. While some theories make more sense than others, there hasn't been enough concrete evidence to determine what really happened to Elisa Lam. Do you have any ideas? Let us know in the comments. Number 5. Katherine Knight. In February 2000, an Australian slaughterhouse worker murdered her lover and was the first woman in her country to get a life sentence without the possibility of parole. Katherine Knight had an extremely difficult childhood. She was the product of her mother's affair that sent waves through her small-town community. Unfortunately, the girl's dad was a heavy drinker and would take advantage of her sexually almost every day. She was often bullied growing up, and at 15 years old, she dropped out of school for good. Not long after, Knight was hired at the slaughterhouse. Strangely enough, she loved her work, so much so that she set up her butcher knives to hang over her bed at night. Eventually, the woman met her future lover, David Kellett, while on the job. The man showed many similarities to her toxic father. He was an alcoholic and often got into violent fights. By 1974, Knight had him wrapped around her finger and got him to ask for her hand in marriage. On the night of their wedding, they had intercourse several times before David got tired and fell asleep. Knight, on the other hand, wasn't done yet and was frustrated her husband left her wanting more. So completely unprovoked, she started strangling him. David quickly woke up and fought her off, but this experience would be a stepping stone in their relationship. David cheated on his wife multiple times, and after she found out, Knight placed their 2-month-old baby on some train tracks shortly before a train was set to arrive. Luckily, a locomotive never came and the child was spared, but this was just the beginning of what Knight was capable of. In 1986, David finally had enough and broke up with her. Knight went on to have several other toxic relationships with men, including her future victim, John Charles Thomas Price. The man refused to marry Knight, and this angered her. In February 2000, they got into a heated argument where she tried stabbing her lover. John, fearing for his life, took out a restraining order against the woman. On the 29th of that month, Knight woke John up in the middle of the night and the two of them had intercourse. After he fell back asleep, she took out a butcher's knife and stabbed the man repeatedly. Once he was dead, Knight dragged him into the living room and removed all of his skin. She then hung John up on a meat hook and proceeded to do her job as a butcher. Apparently, she took some of the flesh home with her and made a meal with it. She wasn't able to keep it down though. After John's co-workers grew worried the next day when he didn't show up for work, they called the police. Authorities went to the victim's home and discovered the killer passed out next to her lover's remains. Knight was arrested on site. If one of your ex-partners woke you up in the middle of the night, would you let them stay? Or would you tell them to leave and threaten to call the police? Let us know in the comments below. And while you're at it, hit that subscribe button. Number 4. Sharon Lopatka. During the early days of the internet, a 35-year-old woman named Sharon Lopatka made up multiple fake personas to appeal to the sexual fantasies of interested users. Sometimes she pretended to be a famous actress, and in other cases, she was an obese dominatrix. Whatever the men who messaged her wanted, they got it. Everything seemed to be working out great for the woman, until she made the decision to meet with a man from one of her message boards. In the past, this person, who was later revealed as 45-year-old Robert Glass, had admitted to Sharon that he wanted to kill her. Despite these obvious red flags, Sharon must have interpreted the admission as some kind of BDSM play, but it was far worse than what she could have ever imagined. After meeting, she was tied up with rope, abused, and forcefully assaulted sexually. On October 25, 1996, police found her naked, dead body near Robert's trailer in North Carolina. The computer analyst was arrested the same day and was charged for killing Sharon. Robert claimed that the woman passed away while they were having consensual intercourse. Investigators found message logs where the victim had asked multiple men to torture her to death. Many played along but backed off when it got out of hand. It was definitely a sick fantasy, but Robert fulfilled it. He served about 3 years in prison before making a plea agreement. He was then given another 27 months for the murder. A disturbing question remains though. If Sharon truly wanted to be tortured and killed, does it actually count as murder? What do you think? Number 3. Jeffrey Locker. In 2011, 42-year-old Kenneth Miner was sentenced to serve 20 years to life in prison for the second-degree murder of 52-year-old Jeffrey Locker. The shocking thing about this case, though, is that Locker actually hired Kenneth to help him kill himself and set the crime scene up to look like it was a homicide. The victim had the suspect hold a sharp blade against the steering wheel of his station wagon, which was parked on a secluded street in New York City's East Harlem. While Kenneth held the knife, Locker supposedly forced his own body onto the weapon and committed suicide in one of the strangest ways imaginable. The middle-aged man worked as a motivational speaker and had 3 children. On the outside, he seemed like a happy guy. But Locker was deep in the trenches of financial debt. It was so bad that the only way he thought he could get out of it was through death. A few years after the original court ruling, another trial was ordered for Kenneth. His lawyer made a plea agreement that the defendant would plead guilty to a first-degree murder charge in exchange for only 12 years behind bars. Since Kenneth was hired by the victim to make the death seem like it was a robbery gone wrong, prosecutors agreed to the deal, claiming it was still a murder-for-hire case even if both parties consented. Locker supposedly didn't want to simply kill himself because if that was the case, his family wouldn't get any life insurance money. Number 2. Subway stairs. In the summer of 2021, a man from New York was taken into custody after killing an innocent woman in a subway station. 53-year-old David Robinson tried to approach 58-year-old Than Thuy while she was moving to the train platform. On her way down the stairs, the suspect attempted to grab her, but instead knocked her over. This sent Than tumbling down the long staircase. She sustained major injuries as a result and was rushed to the hospital, where she was in a vegetative coma for nearly 2 weeks. After clinging to life for that long, Than finally gave in, and she was officially declared dead on July 28th of that year. At the time, the victim was accompanied by her 22-year-old son who witnessed the entire incident. It's believed that David targeted the woman after he thought her son threw a piece of trash towards him. He tried to get a hold of the young man, who then grabbed his mother for balance. Consequently, both Than and her child were knocked down the stairway. After leaving a trail through several petty robberies, police got David's fingerprints and were able to arrest him. He's been charged with manslaughter and murder for his reckless actions. Number 1. Hiroshi MAEVE. In 2009, a Japanese man was sentenced to death after murdering multiple people he'd entered a suicide pact with. Hiroshi MAEVE targeted depressed individuals after speaking with them online through chat rooms and message boards. The Osaka native was eventually nicknamed the Suicide Website Murderer for wickedly convincing victims into taking their own lives with him. Hiroshi had more sinister intentions though. He used the fear and agony they went through for his own sick sexual satisfaction. The killer claims that he suffered from a strange condition called paraphilic psychosexual disorder, which meant he could only get off by strangling someone. His victims, who were all murdered in 2005, met up with Hiroshi, truly believing that he would support them through a difficult mental health crisis and decision, but they were dead wrong. He usually told them that they could pass away side by side in his car by closing all the windows and wiring a charcoal burner inside. Instead of this though, he would suffocate people with his hands. The youngest person he killed was a 14-year-old child. His other victims were a 21-year-old and a 25-year-old. Police were able to track him down after seeing a few of his emails with one of the slain, Michiko Nagamoto. While in custody, Hiroshi admitted that the murders were all filmed, so he could relive the moments and see his victims' terrified faces whenever he wanted. He was truly a sick man. Many people believed that the lives could have been spared if only Hiroshi was kept in prison. The man had a long history with crime. In his past, he tried strangling a child and 2 other women. He briefly served time for these actions but was later released. However, in 2007, the suicide murderer was given the death penalty. Which of these cases did you find the most interesting? Let us know in the comments down below, and be sure to subscribe to see more crazy videos. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time on Bad Badger.